Oh, jeez. This always happens to me. We'll find out if this works. Doing something a little bit different today, as you could probably tell. But I hope we're good. I hope we're live. Come on, OBS. Please. Okay. I believe it's working. I'm going to trust that it's working, despite my eyesight not being fantastic. Uh, I think we're good. Welcome back to Tailosive Tech Live on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're talking about iPadOS because I think there was just so many thoughts and opinions shared after yesterday's video, and there was a lot of follow-ups in the comments that I wanted to address. And this feels like a fairly familiar place that you're used to looking at me like with this background and this lighting setup and whatnot. The colors are washed out, I know. It's kind of difficult to color correct through OBS. So I may still need to tinker with settings with that, but it's not as easy as just dropping things in the Final Cut timeline. But hello from Japan. Wow, why are you up at 2:16 in the morning? I got to read the chat through the phone now because MacBook display is too small. Honestly, the studio display would still be too small from this angle, but essentially there's a theory floating around out there that I would like to entertain that perhaps the reason Apple was preventing iPadOS from getting more functional and more practical is simply because they were afraid that, again, that iPads would become so powerful that less and less people would be buying Macs. And traditionally, at least, Macs have a lot more revenue potential because they're more expensive and Apple can justify spending more and more. So, probably because Apple sees the most amount of success with the entry level Macs, like the MacBook Air. And the entry level MacBook Pro. I don't know why they still call that thing a Pro, but it still exists. And I think that Apple was worried if iPad Pros or both iPad 11-inch configurations and the iPad Air 4 and 5, if those started becoming too practical, they would start eating into Mac sales. It's possible that Apple was waiting for more and more of the Apple Silicon transition to complete because now, inherently, iPads are going to start just having less hardware advantages than they used to. I mean, there was a time where, like, arguably the A12X chip in the iPad Pros from 2018 was better than some of the Intel Macs available on the site. So, they fundamentally kind of had to limit the software to prevent the Macs from selling better. But of course, the difference is now there are MacBook Pros and new Macs coming out that have M1 Pro chips, M1 Max chips. They have mini LED. They have 120 hertz now. They got better webcams. They got better port selections. So not only do they have a couple extra Thunderbolt ports than the iPad, but they now rock. Of course, the headphone jack has always been there, but HDMI, the SD card slots, all of those stack up alongside the Mac argument, and maybe Apple will feel more comfortable updating iPadOS this year as a whole. So it's very speculative, of course, and it's probably the only slight excuse I can imagine for them not putting much emphasis or energy in iPadOS, but I've been wrong before, and I've definitely wished and hoped that Apple would address our concerns with iPadOS, and they don't year after year. So I'm wondering if this is kind of the last straw. Like, were they waiting for the Mac line to get more of its own exclusive silicon that's objectively faster, battery life that's better, displays that are on par, if not better, and we have MacBook Air upgrades coming later in the year, but I would imagine by the time the M2, colorful MacBook Air launches, that's about when iPadOS will be, launching the new version of it to the public. So those types of features, hopefully, if they do start listening to our concerns and start bringing more pro software to iPadOS, then all of that stuff would kind of roll out to the masses around the same time that the new MacBook Air came out. And maybe Apple's thinking, well, M2 chip and, new design and thinner, lighter MacBook that's going to almost compete in a completely different realm from the iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard case, which is very thick and probably a lot more expensive if you consider right now the mini LED iPad Pro is $1,100, and that's with 128 gigs of storage. MacBook Air still starts with 256 gigs for $100 less. Comes with a keyboard and trackpad, whereas the keyboard and trackpad with your iPad Pro, that's going to cost you another $350. So if you just want a similarly spec'd iPad to the cheapest MacBook, you basically have to spend $500 more, which is why I never really bought into this whole iPads are going to cannibalize the lineup. It might make a bit more sense if you're trying to argue the iPad Air, because that's starting at $600 and partner that with a keyboard case. Yeah, but it's still 64 gigs versus 256. I don't know. Maybe Apple's thinking, for general laptop use, 64 gigs might be enough for some people. I'm not sure. Um, I have not tried those headphones, but thanks for asking. The background was throwing me off. I thought this was pre-recorded. I know you're kind of used to me being here when I am recording it, aren't I? iOS and iPadOS needs a total redesign. I'm not convinced iOS does. I'm pretty confident and happy with the way iOS currently sits. There's little tweaks here and there, but I don't have like a giant list of things I want iOS 16 to adopt. I did my wish list video last year, and was it last year or a couple months ago? I don't remember. I just remember doing an iOS 16 wish list video, and a lot of them were fairly minor details. They were not like giant, like fundamental problems with iOS. It's like, whereas I agree, A12Z is still not taken advantage of, or A12X. I don't think those chips are fully utilized with iPadOS, let alone the M1 chip. And now Gurman's telling us M2 chip is coming in iPad Pros later in the year, and I'm just like, oh my god. I don't see them backtracking on the iPad. I don't know if adding Pro software would be backtracking. To me, that's just like moving it forward. Scott says, I don't buy it. macOS has been great for years. I've used every version since Tiger. Their problem was hardware, not software. iPad's problem is the opposite. Software, not hardware. Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. The iPad hardware team has done incredible things. They were the... Keep in mind, iPad hardware team was the first device Apple came up with that had 120 hertz. They're the first device that switched from Lightning to USB-C. No other device has done that but iPads. They're the first device to do Face ID in multiple orientations. That still has not been done on iPhones, but iPads have done it. It's the first Apple device to ever get mini LED. They put that on an iPad before anything else. And it's also the Apple Silicon that went into the iPad that convinced Apple they could transition the Mac lineup. All of that work is being done by iPad hardware teams that figured out how to beef up the CPU and GPU cores onto a larger scale. And once they started coming out with, the A10X, A12X, that's when it was like, okay, we can ditch Intel now. So that all kind of stemmed from that original iPad hardware team, but they just get so much less attention in the software realm, which is a huge disappointment. 64 gigs is enough to use as a Chromebook and maybe to install light apps. It's true, I still have 64 gigs of my iPad Pro, which, you just don't download huge movies, you don't take a lot of high-res videos. You can live with 64 gigs for very light web tasks, but if that's your concern, then the iPad's already competing with the MacBook in that regard, because people can buy a $300 iPad and use that for email and media consumption and all the basic stuff and not have to buy a $1,000 MacBook. So regardless of if Apple wants to acknowledge it or not, like iPads and MacBooks, people get torn on them all the time. There's still people that ask me to this day, like, what should I get? I like the touchscreen and I like the note-taking ability of the iPad, and maybe Apple's trying to, best case scenario, get someone to buy both, and that's their justification. But I just think that what the end result is people buying old iPads and holding on to them for a long, long time, like me, who holds them for 4, 5, 6 years because we see no point in upgrading our iPads. Sure, we'll buy new Macs because, the Macs are getting more powerful silicon and we can utilize that power and performance. But I, at this point, literally have no intention. I can't think of a single thing they could add via hardware to the iPad that would convince me I need to upgrade. Via software, that's a different story. If they change a bunch of things via software with the iPad line, I could see more people justifying upgrading. But until then, and again, spec match a MacBook with an iPad, the iPad's always going to cost more. Sure, the iPad may have more. It may have Face ID and center stage and cellular options, which the MacBook still doesn't have. But you can upsell people on all of those things, whereas you don't really get to upsell people on that much with the MacBook. It's like you pick your storage, you pick your CPU, your GPU, your RAM, that's kind of it. Whereas with the iPad, you can still pick all of those different things if they allowed for it. Right now, they just kind of bunch RAM and the processor and the storage all together. But you still have those options to up the internal specifications, but you can also upsell people on $300 keyboard, $100 pencil, extra $100 to have 5G on that thing. Um, so I'm saying, like, if they did decide in the future to make an iPad Ultra that was bigger and more powerful, and you put in the M1 Pro or M1 Max chip in that thing, and it was capable of running Final Cut and doing actual external monitor support, it has a real file management system. If it was capable of doing all of the things the Mac could do, it would absolutely cost more than the Mac. Like, if you wanted to take all of the internals and the specs of my MacBook Pro and stuff it in an iPad, the iPad would, for one, probably have worse battery life because it's thinner. It would have less ports. It would not get the SD card or HDMI slot or a headphone jack. iPads already don't have that, or at least the high end ones. Um, I don't expect that to come back. So you'd have worse I/O, worse battery life, and it would cost more because it's a touch screen and they got to include a bit more of that. The speaker system probably would not sound as good. So I don't think that iPad's existence would kill the need for MacBooks to exist. And I think that argument is used a little bit too much. People are always like, well, it would eat into MacBook sales. It's like, well, if it did, it would be higher margin. It would be people spending more money on the Apple product, not less. Um, iPad is the only Apple product I've never had the interest on owning. If I ever own one, I guess it will be because my company gives me one, as I'm an iOS developer. That's a decent reason. I feel like a 12.9-inch dual boot iPad with 256 gigs minimum, a Magic Keyboard, and an Apple Pencil would sell like crazy, even though it would be super expensive. I do agree that if people knew they had the option of buying a device that could do both, they would spend a lot more money than what they're spending right now. Um, I guess the logic is Apple wants you to buy both a new iPad and a MacBook, but I I have a hard time believing that's happening. I think more people are just buying a new MacBook and using their old iPad or buying a refurbished iPad or it's fine if its sole purpose is to just be a general media consumption device and you just live with the iPad Air or a refurbished iPad Pro from 2018, but it absolutely does not justify the existence of there being $1,000 iPad Pros still being sold, and updating those iPad Pros to have M1 and M2 chips is just ridiculous. Um, you can upsell on dongles, MacBook cases, and sleeves, and a surprising amount of people buy Microsoft Office at the Apple Store. Well, you can't upsell too much on dongles anymore. They're putting the ports back. I feel like most people who've bought a MacBook in the past 6 years already have at least one dongle that they can use if they need USB-A or Ethernet or whatever. If you haven't bought one, that if your argument is Apple wants to sell more dongles, then why did they put HDMI and SD card slot back on the MacBook Pro? That's like legitimately eating into their dongle sales revenue. Um, the prices of Microsoft Surface 2-in-1s are insane. That's true. 2-in-1s are not inherently cheaper. For the same reason that Apple was okay releasing the iPhone, iPhone killed the sales of the iPod. It's okay because the iPhone cost a lot more than the iPod did. But because it did a lot more, Apple was okay with that, and so were consumers. People were like, yeah, I'll spend $500, $600, $800. Now it's becoming normal for people to spend $1,000 on a new iPhone. Were iPods ever selling for $1,000? No, I don't even think they got close to that, unless you count maybe. No, I don't think even the maxed out iPod Touches got that expensive. But the phone replaced more of our ecosystem. We didn't have to buy a camera and a cell phone and an iPod all separately. We could combine all of those products into one. I feel the exact same way about the iPad. I honestly think that software and hardware wise, it's going to be much, much easier to turn an iPad into a Mac when you want it to be than it would be to turn a Mac into an iPad. That's kind of like the Surface Pro versus Surface Book approach. um, the MacBook hardware from the ground up, building everything into right underneath the keyboard and the trackpad, and that's where your battery is, and then you have this really thin display on the outside. I don't think you can easily re-engineer that design into an iPad when you want, because now you're just going to have this big beefy keyboard and trackpad that also houses your battery and your silicon. So to me, knowing that we can run a Mac off of the M1 chip, and I'm sure the M2 chip, that proves that the iPad basically already has all the hardware necessary baked in to boot into Mac OS. It can support a keyboard and mouse through the smart connector. It can support a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse if you prefer that. It has Thunderbolt, so it can do an external monitor. It has speakers. It has a display. No, the touchscreen doesn't have to stay activated. If you dual boot it into Mac OS, you can just turn off the touch display. That's what Apple does with Sidecar already. You can't keep using the touchscreen, even though your iPad is technically displaying Mac OS. It's viewed as an external monitor. So yeah, if people knew, okay, maybe let's say iPads don't get any of the higher end chips, right? That's potentially what I think Apple may have been waiting for. This is my last sliver of hope I'm holding on to. Maybe Apple was waiting for the MacBooks to finally catch up in terms of innovation, I/O, battery life, display quality. Now that the MacBook Pros have come out and they have all of this more advanced silicon, Apple won't feel too bad if they offered more Pro options, whether it's a dual boot macOS option or just bringing Pro apps to the iPad, because now they'll realize, well, you can buy an M2 iPad Pro or an M1 iPad Air or something like that and kind of use it like a Mac, but you're not going to get anywhere close to the same user experience as a Mac, because even if you did it with an iPad Air, you're spending $900 instead of $1,000. If we just get the cheapest possible setup, you're getting a quarter of the storage, you're getting a smaller display, a worse battery life, and probably worse speakers. You're getting less ports. You don't have the headphone jack. You don't have two Thunderbolt ports, and you don't even have one Thunderbolt port. You just have one USB-C port. You'll probably get less RAM, right? The iPad Air has... No, wait. Does it have 8 gigs of RAM? I'm blanking on it. But either way, you'd be saving $100 and missing out on a lot of things by going with an iPad Air plus Magic Keyboard. Plus, Apple's still probably going to upsell you on, well, if you get an iPad Air, you want to spend $100 on a pencil. And if you want it to be the same storage as a MacBook Air, you need 256 gigs of storage. So before you know it, even if you're not counting the iPad Pro and you're just talking iPad Air, that thing is going to cost more money than than a MacBook Air will, and have a smaller display, worse ports, worse speakers. They both still have Touch ID, so that doesn't change. One more thing. When are we going to get Surface Studio but iPad? I want a 32-inch iPad. I know, man. I want that so bad, especially because I think that iPadOS has its fair share of advantages when it comes to just photo design, and that's where I still design all my thumbnails, is on the iPad. But I've been doing that for the past 7 years, and it hasn't necessarily changed much since then. But macOS has its laundry list of advantages when it comes to pro application support and live streaming like this. I cannot do what I'm doing right now via the iPad. I need the Mac for this. But to just have one device that was capable of doing both, something I could use my Apple Pencil with. And again, I'm not suggesting it has to be cheaper than both. It's okay if Apple wants to charge through the roof for it. I don't care if the Apple, well, they're already using the Studio Mac and Studio Display terminology. What do they call it now? Apple Studio, iMac Studio, because iMac implies all-in-one. So yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. An iMac Studio instead of just Mac Studio, that was just a giant display that when upright was a Mac, and then you could swivel it downward and it turns into iPadOS, and you've got the Apple Pencil and all this infinite customization, and it's 120 hertz too. Oh my god. That would be the dream. I would love that. Let's see. I would say yes for the title, because Apple still has to rely on x64 apps being emulated on Rosetta. I feel like less and less. ARM has been around for a while. Todd says, I'd love to see a really big iPad, like 21 inches would be great for artists/graphic designers, and also as an external display when needed. If the software is there, yeah, I would agree. Steve Jobs imagined the iPad at first as just a devices that do things better than a smartphone and not a proper computer replacement. In 2022, we still see the vision remains the same, do things better than a smartphone since it's so powerful and versatile and yet still not as good as a Mac. But here's the problem with that, Martin. If all your goal is to do something better than a phone, then $1,000 iPads don't need to exist. You can achieve that with, right now the iPad is still lacking basic things, whether it's optimized battery charging, the weather app, the calculator app. Um, there's basic things that our phones still do better than the iPad. So the only advantage really that the iPad form factor has over the iPhone, they're not going to give the iPad a better camera than your phone, and they're not going to make the iPad out of stainless steel, or maybe they'll give it wireless charging. But end of the day, why are you bothering putting Thunderbolt, and why are you selling keyboards and trackpads to iPads if your goal is just to do things a little bit better than a phone? You shouldn't need a keyboard or a trackpad or Thunderbolt if your goal is just do things better than a phone. The only advantage is the bigger screen, and they're not even really doing much with that because all the advantages of that bigger screen is split screen multitasking. That's the only difference between the phone and the iPad. Now you can even get picture in picture on your phone, so that's not a iPad exclusive thing either. Um, Mac still has 40 plus years of software support and it's more open. I think even iPad gets more powerful as the software that matters. I still fundamentally think that if the goal is just to be blown up iPhone, then there's no point in making anything higher end than an iPad Air. That's like the max. And why switch iPads to USB-C in the first place? It's because Apple knew they were going to be used in more pro workflows. They legit were advertising the M1 iPad Pro with a Pro Display XDR. Like you're going to buy a $1,000 iPad and partner it with your $6,000 monitor. Like they're showcasing how great it is to have Thunderbolt on an iPad. Those are not iPhone-like features. I wish they were. They should put Thunderbolt on the iPhone, to be honest. Would justify that 1 terabyte storage option a lot better. But if you're going to have pro iPads that cost $1,000, $2,000 and build in 2 terabytes of storage for something that still doesn't like to handle 10 gigabyte files, the hardware's ahead of the software here by far, and it's nowhere close to catching up. I'd like to see a 16-inch iPad with amazing software. I would too. I've said this before, and I'm say it again for new people if you're just now tuning in. I am not planning on buying another iPad until it beats my MacBook Pro in functionality, in speed, in practicality. Like, I would love to combine my iPad Pro and MacBook into one product. But the reason I'm not buying a new iPad, and the reason I'm trying to put my foot down here is to make a point that no, Apple, you're not making more money by having us buy 2 products because we're just going to pick one. If people are on the fence, it's not like, should I buy an iPad Air or a MacBook Air? People are usually asking me, which should I buy, not should I buy both? That's not typically the question. It's like, should I buy a MacBook Air and then also spend, $600 on an iPad on the side? That's usually not what it is. It's usually people at a crossroads and, they fall back on the one that has the software they're looking for. But if they knew they could spend more money and get something that had the functionality of both, I think they would justify blowing a lot more money on their 2-in-1. iPad needs the Pro apps to even make sense of all this power. We've been saying it for years, yeah. But I agree. I'm trying to hope that the only reason potentially Apple waited so long to give iPad Pro apps, and potentially the reason that iPadOS has been kind of nerfed year after year and it doesn't feel like it's getting many changes, is because they were waiting for the Mac to get better. Now the Macs have gotten a lot better, and the M2 MacBook Air is going to come out later in the year, and it's going to be a really compelling option and very lightweight and very practical and cool looking. And then Apple will feel more comfortable giving the iPads Pro software because they'll feel like a lot of people are still going to buy the Mac, even if iPads get Pro software. They're still just not a very good deal, so people don't justify it. I'm just hoping the reason iPadOS is so far behind is that Apple has been secretly working on a gigantic update for years for it. That would be fantastic. I genuinely would love it if that ends up happening. But at this point, even if it did, just for the record, I'm I'm not switching back to the iPad for video editing or as my daily workflow until I can beat out my MacBook Pro, because I've already spent the money. I'm using it and I love it. The MacBook Pro's software takes advantage of the hardware great. I don't feel like there's hardware that's not being utilized on my MacBook, except the HDMI port, to be honest. I have not used that thing a single time. I know some people were really glad to have that back. I use the SD card slot every day because that's what I record my videos to. But HDMI, it's never come up. I've just never run into that situation where I needed to plug in to that port. Um, but that's okay. It's not like I feel like I could do a ton more with my laptop if I. It's not a software problem. The software's there. It works. But I'm utilizing the 120 hertz every day. I'm utilizing mini LED. I use Touch ID when I'm installing software or unlocking it. The trackpad is massive. The battery life is great. That's been a godsend on my trips when I'm in a place and I need to charge, or not I need to charge, but I need to edit, and I don't have a power source nearby, or I want to use my MacBook basically as a giant battery bank for my iPad or my phone or AirPods. It's like the largest size battery bank you can legally have on a plane. Um, and the fact that it sips so little power when on standby, when the MacBook lid is closed, I can just unzip my backpack and I've got USB-C ports waiting for me right there, and I plug in and I can charge, even over MagSafe. Um, MacBook not for gaming. I think that's the only thing MacBooks aren't for, to be honest. Like, maybe that's the reason so many people want gaming to become a thing on Mac, is because it's pretty much the last thing they don't do. Everything else, I feel like general media consumption and texting people and document writing or software compiling or audio engineering or video editing. It's like all of these things the Mac is great for, except that one thing. So people like to dwell on that one thing, and it's like, don't you want PC to have something, right? Like, if if Macs were good at gaming, I don't think PCs would sell much at all. iPadOS market share is still really small compared to iOS share. I don't even bother in adapting our app for iPad screens and just took the Instagram approach, as more than 99% of our users are iPhone. Well, they're kind of completely different form factors, right? It's kind of silly to compare iOS market share to iPadOS just because, of course, yeah, there's going to be more people with small devices that they can fit in their pocket than there are people who take. It's the same reason there's more iPhones sold than MacBooks. Um, doesn't mean you don't need to optimize things for the MacBook, but um, yeah, it's like if you compare iPadOS to other tablets, other multi-touch devices of that size, iPads are far in the lead. There's nothing else close on Android or Amazon Fire tablets and that kind of stuff. Nothing comes close to the sales of iPads do. So it's still the dominant sector of the tablet market. But yeah, if you compare it to smartphones, well, smartphones are like the biggest market of anything at this point. There's literally over 1 billion smartphones in use on Earth at this point. You're not going to get another device that competes with that in terms of market share. Um, Steve Jobs once compared the iPad to a car and the Mac to a truck. I don't think it's changing anytime soon. Well, why are you putting like a V12 in a car? That's my problem. Is like, I get that argument everyone's trying to make, especially when you dig up the Steve Jobs quotes of like, well, Steve said this, Steve said that. Yeah, Steve was not putting uh, M1 chips. Steve was not pitching that iPads have 13-inch displays and have the same I/O and the same silicon as the Mac. They're so incredibly similar at this point. If your argument was just that an iPad is a car and a Mac is a truck, then the iPad does not need truck hardware. You're basically giving a bed and all-wheel drive and big tires and a beefy suspension system and a higher-end engine that's powered on diesel to your car, when all of those things are far more practical and can be utilized on a truck. And that's not even as good as an example, because that would imply there's hardware differences. At this point, the iPad has all of the hardware necessary. That's what I think makes this argument so difficult for me, is because it's literally a flip of a switch that could allow the iPad to become so much more. It's not like you need to redesign it or re-engineer it this way, like you would to re-engineer a car to turn it into a truck. But if Apple was just making like the budget iPad and the iPad mini, then you would have a point. Like, yeah, okay, they're just putting iPhone CPUs in there, and they're just kind of beefing up some iPhone hardware onto a bigger form factor. Okay, that's fine. But once you start putting M1 chips in Thunderbolt in mini LED, and you start doing really intensive hardware things like that, and you sell it with a keyboard and trackpad, just like a Mac has, Thunderbolt, and it comes with a keyboard and trackpad, and you're giving that to the iPad as well. It's no longer a car at that point. That car argument doesn't work to me. Um, the comparison was for desktops. Modern Mac laptops are more like your Model X than a truck. Even less so now. I feel like there used to be more disadvantages by going with a laptop performance wise, but with Apple Silicon, it's not really the case. Uh, at least right now. I mean, I tried to switch to the Mac Studio and review that to see if I could take advantage of the M1 Ultra's performance, and because Apple didn't want to update the software for it, it was like, nah. M1 Ultra ended up performing pretty dang close to the same as my M1 Max in the laptop, and right now they don't even offer the M1 Pro in any desktop. You have to get it in a laptop, and sure, like there's some advantages to having a beefier cooling system and a better heat sink and stuff, but when I did export tests and speed tests comparing the 24-inch iMac, which had two fans in it, to the M1 MacBook Air, which had no fans in it, the difference was insanely small. It's like, okay, during this one task that's very intensive for an extended period of time, you notice a little bit better performance, but in terms of just video editing or boot up time or Geekbench tests, it was like the difference was insanely small, despite the M1 chip being the same in both, and one of them having a cooling system and one of them not having a cooling system. So, um, why wouldn't you put a V12 in a car? That sounds awesome. Well, you could, but imagine if the car didn't let you go faster than a V4 would. That's, I think, a better example is like if there was a software is more prevalent in EVs than a car, but at this point it's like putting a V12 in a smart car. That's it's not really possible, but that's what it feels like putting the M1 chip in an iPad. It's like, can you take advantage of that? It's like, no, we're going to software limit the engine so that it doesn't perform uh, at its full capacity. It's like, why bother with that? Steve Jobs' idea for the iPad is simply outdated in 2022. I don't think we would cite him for why iPad should remain limited in software. No, I think if Steve Jobs was still in control of the iPad department, he wouldn't have done half the things they've already done. He wouldn't have given it keyboard and mouse support. He wouldn't have made a mini. He wouldn't have made a larger screen size. Maybe he would have gone with thinner bezels. I could have seen that. He could have gone with, iPad Air form factor where they shrink the bezels down a bit and get it up to 10.2, 10.9 inch, 11-inch display. But if you're going to start selling 13-inch displays with a keyboard and trackpad and Thunderbolt, and you're putting the same chips that you put in your MacBook Pro into an iPad, you're the hardware is all the same at that point. Um, Software limited V12 to 200 horsepower, basically. Yeah. Kind of like that. Yeah, that's what the iPad feels like. So iPadOS still better off with Touch UI first approach, and I've never stated otherwise. My approach has always been iPadOS from the ground up. When you take an iPad out of the box, it can run iPadOS. But if you're going to include all of this pro hardware and advertise it with Pro Display XDRs and upsell people on keyboards and trackpads and upsell people on Thunderbolt, this iPad gets Thunderbolt, this one doesn't. If you want to spend the extra money, it's this one has the Thunderbolt, but then you put a file management system on there that can't handle files over 10 gigs, and you're going to sell people 2 terabyte options, 2 terabytes on a freaking iPad. If you're going to offer all those things, put an option in settings. It doesn't have to natively run macOS. That's not what I'm saying. Put an option in settings that says, yes, I'm a Mac user. I want this to download a macOS dual boot option. And I know that for many people, iPadOS is more user-friendly, and that's just what they're comfortable with. I've never once suggested that the iPad should run macOS out of the box. Just that there should be some possible way of installing it. For the same way, sorry, Ray Skywalker. for the same way, like, you can, maybe it's harder now with Apple Silicon, but regardless, for years and years and years, you've been able to dual boot a Mac into running Windows. Okay, that's not me advocating that Macs should run Windows out of the box, but my point is there was an option to do that if people really wanted it. And Apple even advertised it. In the Mac versus PC commercials with Justin Long, he was like, yeah, your Mac can also be a PC. So if there was software available on Windows, which Apple does not design for, that's a completely different company with a completely different operating system, but they were comfortable advertising and selling their hardware and boasting about the fact that it could dual boot into a different operating system with the software you're interested in. I find that a much larger stretch than what I'm suggesting with the iPad, because I'm not trying to push Apple to allow a dual boot that it runs Android or that it runs Windows, even though that would probably align a little bit with what they've done in the past, where they literally advertise that your Mac can dual boot into third-party operating systems. They do that on their iPad. They're advertising that you can run a different software package that they also design. It's still Apple. It's macOS, iPadOS. They're still designing both. So just providing an option so that you can access the software you're interested in, I think would justify people spending thousands of dollars more on their iPad. I know people right now that are like, yeah, no, I would not spend more than like $600 on an iPad because it's running iPadOS and that can only do so much and it's fairly limited in what its capabilities are. But if you started telling people now it runs Final Cut, now it runs Logic or Xcode, now it runs OBS, and now it has external monitor support, and it can do all of the things your Mac can, instantly I could see a ton of people just being like, oh, well, great. If it's got the software, I can justify 2 terabytes of storage. And because my Mac doesn't have cellular, I can justify getting the 5G option. And I can justify getting a pencil and using one device that's capable of all these things because my Mac can't do a lot of iPad things. But I guarantee you that person will be spending more on their 2-in-1 than they would on a Mac because the Mac is just less complicated. It has less hardware involved. I use Windows on Mac just for 3D modeling. There you go. Apple's still comfortable with it. It's definitely become harder since the transition to Apple Silicon, but Apple said on the record they're not fundamentally against it. They said it's up to Microsoft. And I believe people have figured out how to boot Linux on Apple Silicon. Let's see. Apple Game Console will most likely be an Apple. It already is. I don't know what the difference you're expecting it to be. People have been talking about an Apple Game Console for 6-7 years now, and the Apple TV is the closest thing they've got to that. But I don't know how else to explain it to people. Apple can't do anything about making a gaming product. Gaming products are all dictated by games, not by the hardware. I've used this example a million times, so I'm sorry for the people that have already heard it, but the Nintendo Switch hardware is frankly not that good. I hate to break it to you, but if you just look at the GPU on the Switch and the resolution of the display and the frame rate that the CPU can handle, it's not particularly good. But lots of people love the Nintendo Switch, and a lot of people love playing games on the Nintendo Switch. Why? Because it has the games they're interested in, and it has the mobility. Your iPhone probably has better graphics performance than your Switch does. But that doesn't mean you don't need to buy a Switch because I'll just play the games on the iPhone. No, the iPhone doesn't have the same games, or your iPad doesn't have the same games that the Switch has on it. So that's why people buy the Switch, is it's got what they're looking for. We got a super chat. Malarkey Man, thank you. He says, why can't Apple just make a touch-friendly macOS? I kind of understand why they don't, just because, Microsoft tried to make touch-friendly Windows, and I still don't think it really works that well. I'm okay with there being a software that's keyboard and mouse only, just because I think you make a fairly clunky, kind of weird-looking operating system in the event that you try to make something that's touch and keyboard and mouse friendly, especially with like the resizing of the windows and the minimization options and just the way the overall software looks. I think would feel weird if they tried to optimize it for touch. I don't think we need 2 hybrid operating systems, to be honest with you. Like iPadOS, I think, is the closest thing we could get to that. Like iPadOS is at first optimized for touch, but they've enabled it to work with keyboard and mouse fairly well. You can dock a keyboard and mouse to it. You can use the Magic Keyboard case. You could use a Bluetooth mouse. Heck, I don't use the keyboard case anymore, but I do use universal control. So I just move my mouse from my Mac over to the iPad, and I can interact with it that way and still use the keyboard and such. So iOS can be the all-in on touch platform. Same with watchOS, of course. I'm trying to imagine someone uses a keyboard and mouse on their watch. That's so stupid. Okay, so the watch OS in iOS can be all in on touch. Mac OS, I'm fine with that being all in on keyboard and mouse. This is our platform that's from the ground up, built for that. We're not interested in changing it. iPad OS can be somewhere in the middle. I'm comfortable with that being the middle ground, and you can try to make more pro class software for it. Hopefully, they can update iPad OS to support a lot of the things I mentioned in my last video. But end of the day, if you make iPad OS, compatible with keyboard and mouse plus touch, and then you also make Mac OS compatible with keyboard and mouse plus touch, it's kind of redundant. You'll just kind of have two platforms that can do mostly the same stuff. Um, Someone touches my Mac screen and they would expire quickly. That's also true. Mac displays stay inherently much, much cleaner than Windows displays just for the fact that they're not touchscreens. If you use Windows laptops that have touchscreens, you notice the smudges and the smearing. Oh, it's terrible. Um, let's see. I don't need a Mac iPad with studio display is ideal. Oh my god. Why? There are a lot of users who don't need a Mac, they just need an iPhone and or iPad. There are users who want iMac Touch, hence wants iPad to do more Mac features. I think the addressable market for people who want an iPad that's running Mac OS is far larger than, say, the iPod Touch market. And more profitable, by the way. I don't think Apple's making that big a profit on iPods. Um, Apple should make a Mac keyboard for the iPad. That way it's would be able to switch back and forth and it would be native instead of the garbage window. A Mac keyboard for the iPad? I don't understand. Like different hardware? It would still be a software switch though, because the smart connector doesn't handle high amounts of data transfer. So, are you saying it would plug into the Thunderbolt port, or so you're still saying, or you're saying Mac OS would still be on the iPad? You could just only activate it if you bought a certain keyboard? Eh, it seems stupid to me. My mom only uses her iPad. Yeah, I know people that get by with the iPad, and it's been fine at getting the basics done. But I'm more tackling the point of having iPads that cost over $600. If you want to make the argument of, like my grandma is fine with the iPad, she doesn't need Final Cut, then okay, let's just stop making new iPad. Why do we need iPad Pros? Let's just stop with the budget iPad, iPad Mini, and iPad Air. You're done. Why would you need more than that? Why would you need to spend $1,000 on something that you're going to check email with? Um, let's see. Oceanhorn 2 developer said that the Switch isn't close to the iPhone as far as graphics power. Oceanhorn 2 is on both devices. It's in Apple Arcade. Yeah, correct. Um, yeah, we don't need the Apple Pippin second edition. No, thank you. Um, let's see. There's a rumor that Apple's communicating with Capcom and Ubisoft about launch games for an M series powered Apple console. I have not read that from any legitimate source. I remember reading sketchy sources years ago claiming that they were working on a M powered console, but that was in 2020, and I think it was 2019 actually. That was close to 3 years ago, and it never turned into anything. Again, um, Apple tried to position the Apple TV as like a gaming device. That's why they built a gyroscope and accelerometer into the remote, and they were advertising all the. I remember when they announced the fourth gen Apple TV. Oh my god, it was like 30 minutes of game demos of like, wow, you can play Minecraft on this, or yeah, you can play these Wii games because you can swing the remote around like a Wii remote, and didn't happen. Minecraft is the most popular game in the world, and yet Mojang stopped supporting it on Apple TV, and the reason? Lack of use. There weren't that many people playing it. So if you can't get a lot of people playing Minecraft on your device, then it ain't gonna happen. And I think the main reason people go with Xboxes and PlayStations is not really because of their graphics power. It's because they have the games and the software that they're interested in. Whether it's the PlayStation social aspect of being able to talk to people that way, or Xbox Live or Game Pass. So that's just, it's the ecosystem they've bought into. It really has nothing to do with the hardware. Apple could come out with a $300 console that's powered by an M1 Ultra that beats out the performance of the PS5 or the Xbox, and yet it would not make much because it probably doesn't have the games people are interested in. If Apple were working on a console, you would have seen Apple acquiring small companies for their gaming experience for AAA games. I see no acquisitions for that, so not likely Apple thinking. I think people just don't really realize that Apple already makes like more money on gaming than anybody. It's just in the mobile sector, which I know that sucks because people are like, "Well, that's not real gaming," and the reality that you might have to just splash yourself in the face with is the majority of game revenue does not come from your AAA games. It comes from Candy Crush. It comes from uh, Clash of Clans. It comes from Wordle. That that's where a crap ton of money is made in the overall gaming sector, and Apple makes a crap ton through that, and they would make peanuts relative to what they're making on the smartphone than if they were to pursue AAA game titles for a console or a Mac. I've been hearing about it for years, and it never turns into anything. So I would have a different opinion on it if Apple announced it and confirmed it was a real thing that they were pursuing. But I've seen too many false reports and too many clickbaity headlines and too many leakers that aren't leakers claiming it's going to happen for me to believe it anymore. Different topic, but do you think the iPhone mini was doomed to fail in sales, or could have Apple done more to make it as successful as they expected? Um, I think that there's a decent chance part of the reason they made the iPhone mini was to try to keep the entry price of the flagship iPhones lower. Because of course, when you make a smaller phone, you use less materials, you use a smaller battery, use a smaller display, which typically costs less to build. So they knew that when they were making the iPhone 12 and 12 mini, that they were going to make this switch to OLED, they were going to switch to 5G modems from Qualcomm, and that was going to drive the price of manufacturing up. So to me, there was no doubt in my mind, like, iPhone 11 started at $700. There's no way the iPhone 12 is going to start at $700 because it's just getting too much hardware upgrades in a single year. The chassis being redesigned. Of course, there's camera improvements along with that. But the OLED display and the 5G modem, those are two very expensive components that they were including in that model. So, my theory was correct, of course, and it ended up costing over $800 unlocked if you wanted it. Without a SIM, it was $829, so it was $130 price increase, and Apple probably realized that's kind of a big jump to go from iPhone 11 to 12. You go up $130, so introducing the Mini allowed them to not jump up the price as much because now I would still think a lot of people would argue the 12 Mini is a better phone than the iPhone 11. If you don't care too much about the screen size, it's got a better display, it's got a better camera, it's got a better cellular connection. Not a better battery life, but many would still argue, like, yeah, I would rather take a 12 mini over an 11. So Apple was comfortable introducing a smaller, cheaper option because it allowed the iPhone 12 lineup to still start at $699 with a contract, $729 without a contract. So that felt like less of a price gap. You remember when the iPhone 12 came out, there wasn't that many people talking about how much more expensive they were because the ballpark pricing of the 12 series, Mini to Pro Max, all pretty much started at the same $700 price point, just like the iPhone 11 series started at the $700 price point. So I don't think it was necessarily doomed to fail, but I do think that the price increase of the parts that go into the iPhone probably made Apple wonder we should think about making a small one. But I don't think that was the only reason. I think they also just genuinely thought, hey, there's a lot of people that seem to like the smaller iPhones, and with the iPhone 12, they also abandoned the 5.8 inch form factor. The iPhone 11 Pro. That was the last time Apple made an iPhone that was 5.8 inches, and that got a lot of street cred and a lot of hype because people were like, no other phone is this small. Like that iPhone 10 size, that original 5.8 inch display, People are like, this is really comfortable. I like the size, and I like the OLED display, and I like the camera features. And with the iPhone 12 series, they were kind of abandoning that. They were going for even bigger with the Pro iPhones because they wanted that bigger camera and better battery life and whatnot. So, well, I guess not with the 12 Pro. That got worse battery life, but redesigned chassis. So they had to cut the corner somewhere. And that 12 Pro was a 6.1-inch display. So maybe Apple felt like, well, if we're abandoning the sub 5-inch display sector with the Pro iPhone, we should probably have an option out there for people who want a more compact design. And in fact, we can even go smaller than the 5.8-inch form factor. So they ticked off some people when they did that because obviously some people are like 5.4 is too small, 6.1 is too big, 5.8 was my perfect screen size, but you can't win them all, I guess. Let's see. As long as the iPad shows off some serious proness, the event is complete for me. That being said, the last few updates for watchOS have been shocking. Yeah, I can barely remember what they've changed with watchOS. The biggest one I remember from last year was the portrait mode watch face. What else did they change? I don't even remember. Um, let's see. Please talk about anything else other than gaming on Apple products. I would love to, Rudolph. Absolutely. Can we try our best to not ask gaming questions? They're so circular. They all end in the same thing. Maybe they are waiting until all iPads supported have 3 gigabytes of RAM plus, so they can comfortably add more features to iPadOS. I'm not defending Apple, but I'm looking for excuses. I know what you mean, Javon. I'm in the same boat. I'm like looking for why have they done nothing for so long? Why have they done nothing for so long? And that could be it. Maybe they're waiting until iPadOS 16 could cut off support for a bunch of older iPads, and now they can feel more comfortable giving it more pro software because, but I mean, that doesn't, I guess the problem is like Apple doesn't like making software, specifically pro applications like Final Cut and Logic and Xcode. They don't like making those only available on certain Macs. I mean, there are system requirements, but you notice that uh, with most of the apps available on iPhones and iPads, they want them available on all the phones being sold and then some. And right now, iPadOS support, oh my God, the compatibility just goes back so dang far, which means that they're trying to optimize all of these new iPadOS features for the A8 chip, for crying out loud. So maybe if they rose the bar a little bit and started saying, okay, we don't need to optimize the software for the A8 or the A9, we start moving the bar up a little bit, you could get away with offering some more pro features, but wishful thinking, right? Let's see. Would you prefer future iPhones to get thicker instead of the camera bumps getting bigger? I don't think either is a great solution, to be honest. I get why the camera bumps are getting bigger because camera performance on phones is basically the only thing that they can make a noticeable difference with year over year at this point. Like, I don't like the eye hole design of the iPhone 14 Pros that are rumored. It's like, okay, you're going from a notch to giant oval plus a circle at the top. That's a side grade at best. I hardly consider that an upgrade. If anything, I would consider it a downgrade because all of the leaked renders show the eye hole cutting down further into your content. So if you're watching movies or shows that are 2:1 or the aspect ratio is a little bit wider, things that may have not cut into your content with this notch will cut in with the eye hole. So that's kind of annoying. The only thing else that's been really rumored for the iPhone 14 is 48 megapixel camera. What else can they do? The display's 120 hertz. It's already OLED. It's already bright. They could make it a little bit brighter. They could do 165 hertz or something, but it's all going to be very minor and tech specky. So as far as iPhone upgrades go, camera is kind of the only direction you can go. And if I think Marquez talked about this on the Waveform podcast, but they're like counting like the amount of time that Apple spends talking about cameras during the iPhone presentation is growing, and it's probably just going to continue to grow as years go on. It's just going to turn into more and more of a, here's what we changed with the camera this year. Here's what we changed with the camera. Because silicon getting faster is like, who's complaining about their A15 chip being too slow? It's not a thing. So I am noticing the thickness of the overall phone here, though. Um, to be completely honest with you, I already I use this phone without a case, and sometimes I use it one-handed quite a bit, and it's still pretty heavy. This is the heaviest iPhone that's ever existed, and if you make the chassis thicker, it's gonna get even heavier, and you're well on your way to Energizer phone. I saw a lot of people suggesting just make the back of the phone thicker so that the camera bump is flush. You do not realize how ugly, how chonk that phone would be. I think you believe you want that. I'm not saying you're lying, but I think if you got that, you would realize why they don't do it. Um, I think it was Ian Zelbo or somebody I retweeted a while back. He came up with a CAD render. He was like, if we blew up the chassis to be as thick as the camera bump, this is what the phone would look like. It's a freaking brick. It's huge. It's terribly ugly for one. I don't think it necessarily looks better than this, and I don't think it would be comfortable to hold in the hand at all. It would cut into your finger a lot more. It would feel a lot heavier, especially for people who use your phone at night and drop it on your face. You would have to go to the emergency room. It would crack your skull. The freaking weight of that thing. So what it sounds like they're doing with the iPhone 14 is slowly growing both. They're not jumping the size of the chassis to be the same as the camera bump, but they're growing the camera bump and they're growing the chassis. So kind of worst of both worlds. It's not a design decision to accommodate a camera bump. It's they have camera bumps because they need them. They just have far too many advantages with the lenses and the aperture and the amount of light they let in, and the camera performance they want out of a phone requires a bump. I believe even image stabilization is very difficult to do without a camera bump. So that's a funny thing to keep in mind is even that Energizer phone that was super thick and super chonk, it's a candy bar phone, or people saying, is that a phone in your pocket? Are you happy to see me? Giant phone still had a camera bump, by the way. Look it up. If you want to go check out impressions of the Energizer phone, they still had camera bumps. So I never believed that report last year. I just thought it sounded way too impractical that somehow within a single year Apple was going to go from ginormous camera bump to no camera bump, and they've shown no interest in shrinking it. I think the argument of making the phone thicker so that the camera bump goes away, that argument worked back in the iPhone 6 days, probably even iPhone 7, iPhone 10 days. Back then it was like, yeah, this little bump on the back is kind of annoying. They should just blow up the back so that it, not like Samsung blows up the back, but just a little bit thicker so that the bump goes away. That argument made sense years ago, back in 2016, 2015. I could get behind that argument, and I probably did in videos. I think I recall myself saying, I love the iPhone 6, but I wish the camera bump was gone. And the iPhone 6, I think to this day, is still the thinnest iPhone of all time. So ever since iPhone 6, they've been getting thicker and thicker and thicker, with the one exception of the iPhone 11 to 12. That did get a little bit thinner, but then the 12 to 13 got thicker. Now the 13 to 14 is getting thicker. So they're just kind of, slowly boiling the frog in the pot with us, because they're like, oh, well, let's start thin, and they'll get used to the thickness, and then over time we'll get a little bit thicker so we can stuff in a little bit bigger battery, a little bit better camera, and they'll get used to it. To make iPad more competitive with Microsoft Surface, iPadOS needs to be less like a bigger iPhone. They've been making efforts to do so recently, but it just needs to be more PC-like. I think I agree with what you're saying, is that iPadOS is borrowing basically its entire framework and its entire UI from iOS, which I think for most iPads makes sense, but at least with Pro iPads and iPads rocking M1 chips and keyboard and trackpads and that kind of stuff, they need to borrow more from macOS. It needs to be like a reworked version of macOS, not a reworked version of iOS, yeah. Is this vid about iPhones or iPadOS? It's whatever you want it to be. These live streams are... We kick off the stream with a particular subject that's in the thumbnail and title, but I know it's impractical that I could talk for over an hour on one particular subject, although I have done it. So because it's live, I want to interact with you guys directly. So if you have other tech questions, Yeah, let's for the most part keep it, tech related. Whoa! Thank you, Matt, for the super chat. That was nice of you. Hoping the iPad Pro 11-inch gets mini LED when updated. If not, what is your opinion on display quality versus size? I have the same issue with having the iPhone mini for size, but wishing it had ProMotion. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm kind of weird. I can appreciate a small, compact design, and also I'm still a huge fan of big displays. I like big screens, and I cannot lie. That was really nice of you, Matt, to donate. Thank you. Um, I hope the 11-inch iPad Pro gets mini LED, but according to Quo, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. It's not looking good. Apple allegedly is having a hard time ramping production of mini LED panels, and I from what I've read, they don't plan on introducing it to the 11-inch Pro, which is a bummer because I thought that would have been the most obvious thing to add to the iPad Pros in 2022 because they don't need faster silicon. They don't need, I don't know what else. Better cameras, I guess. I'm not going to complain, but it's definitely not going to win anybody over. Well, I'm not interested in the iPad Pro. Oh, it got a telephoto lens. Now I'm interested. That's not happening. So I was like, well, the one thing that felt a little bit weird about the last iPad Pro upgrade was mini LED was only on one size. Why don't they put it on the 11-inch? I don't think this is the case, but I was wondering if one of the factors is that mini LED is fairly expensive. Um, they had to drive up the price of the MacBook Pros when those adopted mini LED. The 13-inch one started at the 4-port 13-inch one started at $1,800. Now the 14-inch one starts at 2,000. The 16-inch MacBook Pro used to start at 24. Now it starts at 25. Um, I don't think it's because of the Apple Silicon personally. They removed the Touch Bar, which was not cheap. That was an OLED panel, so they could save money on that. And of course, they ditched Intel and AMD, so they saved money on that. I personally believe the M1 Pro and M1 Max of all configurations are still much much cheaper for Apple to build and to put in their laptops than the Intel processors and AMD graphics they were using before. So they saved money everywhere else, but they poured all of that cost savings directly into the displays by making them mini LED, which I don't believe were cheap. Um, so maybe they don't want the iPad Pro line to have such a high starting price. From the stats I've read, not Apple claims, but other research groups have studied how what models of iPad Pros most people are buying. It was like over 60% were buying the 11-inch, not the 13-inch. So if most people buying iPad Pros are buying the smaller size, I'm guessing that. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Alex. I'll read that in a second. Um, Most reason people are going for the 11-inch is probably that lower starting price. And it's possible that, mini LED so far has only been on 13-inch displays or higher. That's actually kind of funny to think about is the iPad Pro mini LED is the smallest mini LED display they make. All the MacBook Pros are bigger, and the Pro display isn't really mini LED, but yeah, it's still much bigger. So it's possible that they just want to preserve that entry price of $800, and they think that's a really really good starting price for the iPad Pro because it kind of aligns with their pricing ladder, right? Like you've got the budget iPad for 300, iPad Mini for 500, iPad Air for 6. So you've got a little bit of spacing here with the iPad line, and they're worried that that jump might be too drastic if they just went from okay, iPad Air starts at $600 and then iPad Pro starts at $1,000. It's like, well, wait, what? If we went straight to $1,000, I don't know what they would charge for it, but it would definitely be more. If the 13-inch iPad Pro got a $100 price increase, I would at least expect that. So maybe the 11-inch iPad Pro with mini LED would start at $900, and that's quite a bit bigger of a gap. Better excuse, if that was the case, iPad Air sales, they would go through the roof. Because right now, people already think that the iPad Air and Pro have too many similarities, and you could save so much money by just going with an Air. If they then attached another price hike to the 11-inch iPad Pro, everyone's going to be like, I don't need mini LED. And honestly, I don't blame people if that's what they think. I tried mini LED when I reviewed the M1 iPad. It's noticeable in side-by-sides, I'll admit. Like, if you put Liquid Retina versus Liquid Retina XDR next to each other. Yeah, I can tell the difference. It's a contrast ratio thing and it's a richness of the colors type thing. I can see it, but would I spend extra money for it? Probably not. It's like how much do you hate those black bars when you're watching content on your iPad? Sure, it's a little annoying, but the one thing I remember standing out to me when we reviewed the mini LED iPad was the black bars are still there. They're not gone. They're substantially dimmer. So when you're watching 16 by 9 or narrower content on your iPad, the mini LED helps with those black bars, but it's you can just ignore them. It's really not that big a deal. Alex H says if Apple won't give us mini LED on the 11-inch Pro, they should at least go back to the 749 price point like the 2018 Pro. Otherwise, it's just not worth it. Was the I don't Yeah, no, Marginal's correct. I don't think the 11-inch Pro was ever 749. I don't recall that being a case. Um, the last time an iPad Pro started at 749, I think it was 10 and a half inches, and that was in 2017, not 2018. Um, but I don't expect any price cuts in the near term because Apple is paying big money for inflation and rising costs, and Qualcomm's driving up prices, and I'm sure TSMC is probably driving up prices as well. So, in the inflationary environment we're in right now, definitely don't expect price cuts. That's the last thing you should expect right now. You should be consider it a price cut if Apple doesn't increase the price. That's where I've sit. I know it's a very Apple sheepy thing to say, but um, we've had 10% inflation in the past couple of years. So I was honestly kind of surprised that the iPad Air 5 stayed at 600 bucks. I guarantee you they're taking a smaller margin on that iPad now just by keeping the price the same. They included 5G modems, they're including center stage. It absolutely costs Apple more to build the iPad Air 5 than it did the Air 4. Aren't people programmed to ignore black bars by now? Look at the content, not the black around it. I don't get it. Yeah, I mean, I can agree it's a little bit more annoying on the iPad because most iPads are like close to the 3 by 4 aspect ratio. So maybe that's Apple's justification. I put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. That was weird. So pretty much the only iPad in the lineup now that's 4 by 3 is the 13-inch iPad Pro and the budget one. But Apple's not going to even do laminated displays on the budget one, so let's not talk about that. But most content is not 4 by 3. Most content on YouTube is 16 by 9, and then most movies and TV shows usually shoot even narrower than that. So you'll notice those black bars, I would argue, a lot more so on an iPad than a TV or a phone, because TVs are typically 16 by 9 and phones are even wider. So the black bars just consume a fairly small percentage of the overall display. When you're watching 2 by 1 or 16 by 9 content on an iPad, the bars are much bigger than most other devices. So maybe their justification is because the iPad Pro 13-inch is so big and the aspect ratio is kind of weird. We should put mini LED on that so you can completely black out those bars. On the 11-inch iPad Pro, it's a little bit taller. It's not quite 16 by 9, but it is not as bad as 3 by 4. So there's less black bars on that one total. I know Scott in the chat has been talking about mini LED on the smaller iPad for a while now. So I want it to exist. I'm not trying to justify that it should keep Liquid Retina. At this point, honestly, it would be a good idea for the iPad Pro to have a bit more features going for it than the iPad Air has going for it, because they're very close. In terms of now they got the same processor. They're basically the same screen size. They both have one USB-C port, and I guess that's the end of the similarities. They're not actually as similar as people make them out to be. Why would I get the Pro? The Air is $200 cheaper. If you said that, you're being targeted by the Air. That's the demographic it's going after. Let's see. Oh, it was still 749 pounds in the UK. Gotcha. But Alex super chatted in US dollars, so I assume he's not in the UK. Some people can't use OLED displays due to pulse width modulation. Do you think Apple will do something to accommodate for people who get migraines from OLED? I don't know the numbers on it. I've heard of that being a problem for some people, but I want to know what percentage of the population it bothers, because the best-selling phones for the past few years, both iOS and Android, have all been OLED. So I'm sorry. I apologize to those people. I would be really frustrated if I was in your shoes, just because um, if you found out that basically all screens were going in a particular direction that gives you migraines, that would be very, very annoying. But I don't think it's a large enough portion of the population for Apple to just continue to offer an LCD option. Although I think they will technically. I mean, the iPhone SE is an LCD. I mean, it's not the newest, coolest phone, but it just came out, so they'll probably sell it at least for another couple of years. Um, the more I think about it, the more I'm realizing Apple was probably updating the iPhone SE this year simply because they weren't going to be able to buy enough 4G modems anymore. They realized like industry's moving away from 4G modems, and that's what the SE uses. That's what the iPhone 11 uses, which they're currently still making. But if all tradition holds up, um, iPhone 11 should be discontinued by September because it's already $499, and it's not 5G. And I'm fairly confident Apple's going to want to be able to brag about by the end of this year. We have a complete 5G lineup. Every iPhone you buy now has 5G. Um, so that's probably why they decided to update the SE now. Um, let's see. Why am I standing? Why not? I like. It's probably better for me than sitting around all day. Um, if iPad Pro were to get a glass back, then I would want it to be like the Pro iPhones and not just regular glass. Oh yeah, I guess that would look kind of nice, huh? I'm trying to imagine the frosted glass of the iPhone just on the entire back of an iPad. Man, it would be so much heavier though. That's what I don't think people realize. Like the reason iPhones are so much heavier than they used to be is mostly because of the glass back. The stainless steel is not helping, but if you are used to using a glass backed iPhone, like if you're using an iPhone 12, especially a Pro or an 11 Pro or a 13 Pro or something like that, or even just any iPhone that has an OLED display, basically, and then you go back, pick up an iPhone 7 for a couple seconds, pick up an iPhone 6. It's weird. It feels like it's air. It feels like nothing. Like I've gotten so used to this phone, and my friend Ross still uses the same iPhone 7 Plus that I reviewed on this channel, by the way. The unboxing and the camera I tested and all that. Like I that was my phone, and then when I was ready to upgrade, he bought my old phone. But I pick up his iPhone 7 Plus from time to time, and I'm just like, what the heck? It feels like air. It's like nothing. It's so insanely light because it doesn't have that giant slab of glass on the back. Um, I think you talk faster when you stand up. Really? I'm not really looking forward to the future where everything's moving to OLED when OLED gives me migraines. I know that sucks. I guess I would just say buy an iPhone 11 and hold on to it as long as you possibly can, Get some, I don't know, get some spare batteries to replace it over time, but that's probably the like best non-OLED iPhone to ever exist. I can't think of a better one. Maybe if you like the home button, buy an iPhone 8 Plus or something, but nah, iPhone 11. It's got night mode, it's got the ultra wide camera. So it sucks. I don't have a solution for you, but I don't know what percentage of the population is bothered by that, and I have a feeling it's fairly low considering that the best-selling phones are all OLED in most recent history. Um, Karen super chatted and said, "Does standing for so long in one spot hurt?" I thought it would, but I've been live for a while now. I feel like over an hour, and I don't feel tired. I don't feel like I need to sit down or something. I feel fine. So do you use Canon lenses on your Blackmagic? No, I use a Rokinon, but honestly, I'm not too happy with it. So it's fine. It's just that I've realized after using this camera for so long that the micro four thirds sensor just can't get quite as sharp as a full frame sensor. So I've got a lot of things I gotta buy, and it's a minor difference. I don't think a bunch of people will notice if I switch to full frame anyway. But there's a different camera I've been looking at that I want to buy at some point, but I probably won't buy it anytime soon. You can buy LCD for OLED iPhones, but it's very risky. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I don't think that'll work. So many desk workers from COVID. No one knows how to stand anymore. You know, standing has not hurt me, but I went on a mountain bike ride a couple days ago, and it was a good ride. It was like 10.5 miles, and I was really tired by the end of it because we went up these big hills, and I was very exhausted. But once I started walking around the next day, my hip kind of hurts. So I kind of find myself limping sometimes. So I don't know if I pulled something or it's just sore. But I'm just getting older, basically. You know, you're getting to that age where you start to feel things more. So I notice it when I'm walking around. I'm like, that feels weird. But it doesn't hurt to lay down or sit down, but it also doesn't appear to hurt to stand in the same place for a long time. Let's see. I picked up my mom's OG iPhone SE, and that thing feels like nothing compared to even my 13 mini. Yeah, I believe the isn't the 13 mini a little bit heavier than the 12 mini, if I remember correctly. They physically increased the battery capacity. Um, I believe so. I got the 11-inch iPad Pro model because of the size, not because of the price. I like the form factor, so I want the XDR screen on the 11-inch size model. Regards from Norway. Thank you, Mr. Aspen. Uh, yeah, I know a lot of people go for it with the size, but come on. Don't act like the price doesn't help. You're telling me you don't mind that you got an extra $300 by going with that one or 200? It helps. It's always a little bit of a factor. We don't have to say it's the driving factor, but it helps out a little bit. Um, Use a cropped camera in 2022. Well, it's not. Is it Micro Four Thirds count as cropped? I don't know. It was a good deal. I'll admit there was for what the camera was capable of back when I bought it. There was nothing really else like it. It was very difficult to find something that um, shot at ProRes and did the 4K at 60 for this price. And it was very, very compact. It was very small, and that was helpful for me for travel and the amount of times I moved my camera around. So I wanted something small with a high bit rate, and I wanted HDMI, and it had Type C. So at the time it came out, it was good. It's just there's much better stuff available now. So I haven't updated my camera for over 3 years, I think. Yeah, I think I bought it in like March of, or it may have been February of 2019. I know I definitely bought it in 2019 because I was not in this house. I remember unboxing it in my last house. I'm 24. Being the same age, I understand your pain. I'm not that old, but yeah, I'm getting to that age where I start to notice things hurting a little bit more. It's not that bad. I'm sure it only gets worse as time goes on because I've talked to people older than me and they're like, "Yep, that just keeps happening." Um, I'm sure you can turn on color filters on in settings, which basically turns off the PLED feature. Well, yeah, it's already got a filter on it, but it's just not a very good one. I love the iPadOS 16 wishlist video. Are you going to make an iOS 16 wishlist one? I did. Just look it up. I believe it's. Let me see what you have to search. If I just search iOS 16 wishlist, well, for me at least, I'm the first result. But just look for the one by Tailosive Tech. That was 4 months ago. I went with the iPhone 13 Pro, and the MagSafe pop socket helps a lot, even considering going for the Max for 14. Okay. Well, that's good. Oh, your back is thrashed. Oof, that's terrible. I haven't had any back issues yet. Um, I don't know if I'm the only one, but the 13 Pro Max size is more comfortable than the 10s Max once I got used to it. I have not felt that way. I've never found this chassis more comfortable in the hand, personally. I've always found the rounded chassis from the iPhone 10 and 10s and 11 days. That always just rested very nicely in the hand. And I've never gotten that from a squared off. I still think this looks better. I think it looks cleaner and it refracts less light. Um, oh, you're talking about people getting migraines from the OLED. I see. Uh, yeah, just the flat edge design I do think looks a lot more futuristic, and I think it looks better than the rounded off. But um, objectively, well, I guess it's not objective. Subjectively less comfortable for me at least. To me, the best of both worlds would be if they rounded the back and kept the front flat, which is basically what Steve Jobs did with the original iPhone. The back of the phone was round and the front was flat. So I don't know if they're saving that for a rainy day or they'll eventually upgrade iPhones to support that, but that would be my dream chassis if I was in charge of designing it. I would make the back round so it feels more comfortable and then keep the front flat so it refracts less light. You don't really hold the phone from the front edges, so I don't think it would make it uncomfortable to have the front stay flat. It wouldn't, the back of the phone is what you touch. So, what is the point of life without carbs and sugar? Oh, I know. You sound like a lot of people I know. I gave up carbs and sugar, and now when I work out, I have little to no soreness. Well, I've tried to give up most processed sugar. I definitely haven't given up carbs. Um, but I know what kind of soreness you're talking about. I used to get real bad cramps whenever I would do exercise, but that was because I was eating whatever I wanted. Now that I'm not eating processed sugar, I just basically cut out desserts, and I watch how much I eat. I'm not paying super close attention to what I'm eating. Like I'll still eat bread, which I know is high in carbs, um, and I'll still eat red meat. Um, but I just don't eat too much. I try to keep it under my calorie daily burn rate, which I think at my weight and height I burn something like, what was it? Oh man, my wife just told me it the other day. I think I'm burning like 2,000 calories or I think it was 19, maybe like 1,900 calories per day. So as long as you eat less than that, then you're technically losing weight. And I'm trying to lose weight in a controlled manner. I'm not trying to drop off all at once. Because that's usually, if you do lose a bunch of weight all at once, you typically gain it back very quickly. So I'm trying to like steadily drop weight, which I have. I'm actually, I weighed myself right before the stream, and I'm at the lowest I've been in 5 years, I believe. So thank red meat good. Eat as much as you can. I do. Okay, cool. Um, I haven't had sugar or Coke for about 8 or 9 years. I try not to, which is hard because people will offer me desserts or cookies and things, and I'm not like completely sworn off. Like I think I had a sip of my wife's. She hadn't had soda for like 6 months, and we went to a restaurant. She got a diet Coke, and I hadn't had soda in months, and she didn't finish the one glass they gave us, but I just tried a sip of it, and I was like, whoa, that is sweet. It tastes like drinking honey. It's crazy what happens to your taste palate when you're used to not eating things that are super sweet. So if someone brings cookies or cake or something, or I'm at a party, I try not to partake, or ice cream or any of that stuff. Um, but I've genuinely been very surprised with how much weight you can lose just by eating less. Because I'm swearing off the desserts, but my wife is not. She's still comfortable eating desserts. She just doesn't eat more than her daily burn rate, which I think is 1,600 calories or something. So she just makes sure whatever she eats whatever. But as long as she doesn't take in more calories than she burns, she's been losing weight too, and it's working. Um, your basal metabolism is likely 1,900 to 2,000, so probably burning 2,500 a day with moderate activity. Yeah, with that bike ride, oh my god, I bet I burned close to 4,000 calories that day. Um, Coke gives me headaches, but Monster Energy doesn't. Oof, yeah, you want to talk about what's bad for you? Oh yeah, that's true. I also do intermittent fasting. That partly helps. I'm not following that super strictly, but we typically just only eat between 12 and 8 o'clock, and we don't eat outside of those windows. Welcome back to Tailosive Health, everybody. I'm sorry. Sometimes you guys get personal, but I don't mind, especially near the end of the stream. We've kind of talked to iPhones and iPads for a while now. Yeah, I used to drink a ton of energy drinks, but they're not good for you. I'm sorry. Even the good ones are not good for you. Even the ones they say are good for you are really not that good for you. So we don't drink coffee. We don't drink soda. We don't drink. I cut out energy drinks when I got married, which was over 3 years ago now. But I will admit I miss the taste. They tasted amazing, especially when it was a late night and I was working and I needed something to get me through a video or get me through editing. I would get those fruit punch rock stars, or I would get a Monster. Um, those things were delicious. I often forgot breakfast. Does that count for intermittent fasting? Yeah. That's basically what happened to us. We're like, well, we're so busy in the morning, we just don't eat breakfast. Um, Todd reacts as came for the tech, stayed for the health tips. Yeah, I think there's some really good because to be honest with you, like I lost probably 20, 25 pounds just from watching what I eat, just from not consuming more calories than I burn. Which, like, who was it? Zach. Like Zach said, I'm probably around 1,900 or 2,000 calories daily. So as long as you're not eating that much, regardless of if you're exercising, you'll start losing weight. So I was kind of surprised by that because we weren't exercising that much. It was like 20 pounds lighter, and I was like, I'm not even doing anything. I'm just not eating as much. I was still pretty sedentary lifestyle. I would edit my videos and I would talk, and then I would go hang out with my wife and we'd just socialize and meet up with people. But I wasn't like doing a bunch of push-ups. Well, I was doing some push-ups, but not that many. I wasn't like taking up that many workouts, and I started leveling out around 195, and I was like, okay, I want to keep going, so let me try to do some more workouts. So now I'm trying to bike ride more, and that seems to be helping. Now, I still mow the lawn, I guess. That's kind of physical activity, but not. It's like 2 hours of me pushing around a mower. I don't know if that counts as exercise. Maybe it does, but um, this morning I weighed in at 192, which is even better. Um, just wanted to say hi. Did you see my comment on calorie density in case you feel hungry but forbid yourself to eat? You should look into that. So far, it hasn't happened yet. So I'm not terribly worried because uh, most of the time I'm not hungry. I'm not like, oh, I want to eat more, but I can't because my calorie. It's like, I feel full. So sorry, I didn't see your comment on that, but I guess I'm not terribly worried about it. Um, let's see. General rule of thumb is 500 calorie deficit per day will lose 1 pound a week. Very small changes will do this, and it is actually sustainable. Yeah, we talked more about this on the most recent Tailosive Talks podcast, which is far more relevant than Tailosive Tech right now. I'm sorry for all the tech people. Um, Mowing the lawn this time of year, isn't it snow on the lawn? Oh, I see Rudolph doesn't know where I live. That's good. It doesn't snow where I live. It's actually quite hot right now. But yeah, it's like I think I remember my wife saying that 3,500 pounds. Sorry, not sorry. Oh god, 3,500 calories is 1 pound. So yeah, like you said, if you're burning 500 calories more than you're intaking every day, that's 1 pound a week, which I think somewhere between 1 to 2 pounds a week is the recommended healthy amount of weight loss. If you're losing more like 5 pounds a week, it's considered more scary or sketchy, or it's more likely for you to gain that back. So I'm aiming for that kind of middle ground of trying to lose 1 to 2 pounds a week, and I've been pretty consistent with that so far. So my recommended weight range for my height is somewhere between 155 and 189, and it partially is dependent on your bone structure, and I have very wide shoulders, wide hips. I'm just kind of a bulky guy in general. It just runs in the family. So I'm trying to get into the 180s, and I think I'll be comfortable with that. But also trying to work out more. So health is important. Y'all got one body. Take good care of it. You're not going to get another one. Unless Apple figures something out with the head replacement software. They're going to put the calculator app on your body before they put it on iPadOS. I eat one meal a day and exercise 7 days a week. I lost 35 pounds just trying to reduce inflammation and not take pain pills. Oh, okay, that's good. When you eat right, you are hungry less often. I've noticed that too. Eating unhealthy foods makes you hungrier. Um, you have a lot of Norwegian viewers. Is that true? I'm a Norwegian as well. Well, let me look at the stats. I can check audience analytics right here on the phone. So let's see. Most of what's funny is the age. Most of my audience is between the age of 25 to 34. So most of you watching me are older than me, which is kind of funny. We're 94% male, 5.8% female, and 0.2% user specified. About 50% of my audience is in the US, 7% in the UK, 5% in Canada, 3% India, 3% Australia. So not a ton from what I'm seeing. What's still interesting to me is that 55% of my watch time is from people subscribed. So there's 44% of you watching that aren't subscribed. I'm not saying you should subscribe. I just wonder why there's so many people watching that don't like. How do you find these videos? Is it just recommended? As Dwight Schrute would say, Drew has those wide birthing. I would be so good at giving birth if I could. 32 here, 21 here. I'm 20, female here. Um, Melody, thanks for tuning in. I like Apple Fitness Plus, though I do wish you could search for workouts, so I still use Fit More. I want to just make a point here for a minute. At my worst, near the end of 2018, I was 245 pounds. I just clocked in at 192. I have not used Apple Fitness Plus a single time. Just for the record, you can be an Apple sheep, you can be a techie guy, and not go to the gym. I've never paid for a gym membership. I've never worked out at a gym and lose over 50 pounds just by doing your own exercise and eating healthier. You don't need to spend $7 a month to lose weight. You don't need an Apple TV. You don't need enthusiastic people telling you how to work out in any particular manner. It could help, but definitely don't assume you have to subscribe to something in order for you to lose weight. It's all dependent on you. It's not Apple Fitness Plus that's making you lose weight. You're losing weight. It's all on what you do. Just because I recall a lot of people back when I was over 200 telling me, Drew, you look a lot bigger than you used to. You should lose weight. And I agreed, but it was all just, you should subscribe to Fitness Plus, or you should get a Peloton, or you should buy this, or you should buy that. And it's like, there's a lot of business in the guilt tripping industry of just like making you feel bad about your health. So you should spend money on your health. This is an investment in you. You're spending this money on your body. And it's like, well, you're giving it to someone. They're offering you a service, sure, but don't act like the money leaving your account is what's causing your weight to drop. It's you doing that. Karen super chatted, how tall are you? I'm 5'11", last I checked. My hair is very poofy, so oftentimes there's people in my life that are 6 feet tall and they think I'm 6 feet tall, but if I was bald, I would look much shorter because my hair goes up a lot. But last I checked, 5'11". I lost all my weight before Apple Fitness even came out. There you go. Mike said it can be done. Gym memberships are scams. I would like to quit the gym. Do you ever use the time to walking workouts? I've enjoyed some of those. No, I haven't. I like listening to music while I mow the lawn, so that's my go-to. Eating habits are more important than exercise when it comes to just weight. Yeah, I would agree. Why no EV podcast this week? Schedules for everybody have been all over the place. For Nick, for Mike, for Randy. So everybody on the EV podcast has had different stuff going on. So if all goes well, both tech and EV podcasts should be back this week. But yeah, schedules are very tricky to align, especially because everybody has different jobs. I'm the only one who's doing the YouTube stuff full time. Everybody else has got work going on in their lives. So they're trying to make time for that, plus their personal life. So I'm 6 feet tall. We'll have to compare. I'm sure you're taller. Which do you think is going to be more interesting, GigaFest Texas or the combination of the next few 2022 Apple events? Probably the next few Apple events, just because I don't think that the GigaFest Texas is going to be good. I'm expecting a lot of disappointment. I lost more weight when I didn't have Fitness Plus compared to when I had the free trial. There you go. We have proof from Marngel. Fitness Plus makes you gain weight. Undeniable science. Can't argue with it. Investing in yourself is a good idea if you do it for real, like putting money in a jar every time you don't buy junk food. Yeah, invest in yourself. Don't invest in other companies trying to make you feel bad or trying to convince you that if you pay for this, it'll fix you. It's like, you can fix you. That's who's doing it. Sure, it's fine if you want to use other people's equipment or other services. Personally, I think a gym membership is far more justifiable than Fitness Plus. Fitness Plus is workout videos. It's not providing you any equipment. It's a subscription to watch a video. That's There's countless workout videos on YouTube you can watch for free. Um, and I would also, it's YouTube. So if you don't like the ads or something, you could get YouTube Premium, and then you'll watch a lot more YouTube than you'll watch Fitness Plus, because that content is not interesting outside of working out. Yeah, don't lose the jar. Do you still have a streak and close out your rings every day? No, I haven't followed the rings that closely. That's what, also something kind of interesting, is because we lost a lot of weight without doing much exercise, just eating. Um, I haven't paid too much close attention to my activity rings. Let's see. Bring your friends to go work out. Yeah, I do. I do. We bike ride. I bike ride with my friend. $7 for having your heart rate on a 4K TV. That's what you're paying for. People are like, yeah, but the YouTube doesn't have the activity thing show up. That's $7 a month for that heart rate to go on a TV. That's what you're paying for. I don't recommend it. Um, I'm a pretty good cook, so all my cooking and baking is homemade. Good thing to my wife, can't make anything other than grilled cheese. We're the opposite. My wife is an amazing cook. I'm a terrible cook, and I barely know how to cook anything. But anyway, I've been live for a while. We could talk more about health. Oh, one last super chat from Karen. I greatly prefer pressing the touch bar buttons in Final Cut Pro rather than Option Plus I'm still clinging onto my 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro because touch bar. I'm right there with you. I really want the touch bar back. That's my biggest complaint with my current MacBook Pro, is just because I've used MacBooks with touch bars. I loved it. I thought it was great. I know that people disagree with me, and I know why Apple got rid of it, but I'm just saying, if it was an option, if it was a $300 add-on at checkout, I would have spent the $300 on it, because I would use the crap out of it. But that's just me. Anyway, we can talk more about health and fitness and weight loss over on Tailosive Talks. We're going to be doing, hopefully, some more podcasts on that channel, so stay tuned for that. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care, all. Have a good one. Bye-bye.